You've probably felt it. The heaviness that clings to your chest when you wake up, the ache behind your eyes that you carry through the day, the quiet voice that whispers, "You're not enough. You're broken. You're failing." Emotional pain is one of the most isolating experiences a person can endure. Not just because it hurts, but because it convinces you that something inside you is fundamentally wrong. It convinces you that everyone else is functioning properly while you're falling apart. That if you were stronger, wiser, more faithful, you wouldn't feel this way. But what if that's a lie? What if emotional pain is not a sign that you're broken, but a sign that you are alive, aware, and deeply human? What if it's not the problem, but a profound message you've never been taught how to read? In a world obsessed with productivity, positivity, and perfection, pain is treated like a glitch in the system, something to be silenced, numbed, fixed. We learn early how to hide our sadness, laugh through our anxiety, spiritualize our emptiness. We learn to medicate the symptoms rather than understand the source. But what if emotional pain is not an enemy to be defeated, but a messenger to be honored? What if it's the soul's way of speaking when words are no longer enough? C.S. Lewis wrote, "Pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our consciences, but shouts in our pains." Pain is a megaphone, not because God wants to torment us, but because it's often the only thing loud enough to pierce through the noise of our illusions. We spend so much of our lives building around our pain, careers, relationships, habits, even spiritual practices, all designed to keep it hidden, controlled, managed. But pain is not interested in being managed. It wants to be seen, heard, felt. It wants to show us what is wounded, not to shame us, but to heal us. Imagine for a moment that your pain isn't your failure. It's your teacher, that it carries intelligence, that it has been trying to get your attention, not to destroy you, but to call you back to yourself. This is the beginning of a different relationship with suffering, one that does not demand you escape it, but invites you to walk with it. Not to collapse under it, but to let it reveal what you've been avoiding. Because beneath the sadness, there is a longing. Beneath the anxiety, there is a fear that wants to be understood. Beneath the numbness, there is a story that was never allowed to be told. And that story matters. You matter. The pain you carry is not random. It is rooted in something true. It may be the result of loss, of trauma, of unmet needs, of betrayal, of living in a world that often wounds sensitive souls. But it is not a sign of your weakness. It is the exact place where your healing begins. In this journey, we'll explore how pain, far from being a sign of brokenness, is often the soul's way of awakening. We'll walk through the stories we tell ourselves about suffering, the hidden wisdom pain carries, and the radical possibility that you are not broken. You are being reshaped, refined, remembered. This is not self-help. This is soul repair. And it begins when we stop asking, "How do I fix myself?" and start asking, "What is my pain trying to show me?" Because the truth is, pain doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're feeling. And in a numb and distracted world, that is not weakness. That is the beginning of meaning. Pain speaks in paradox. It feels like destruction, but it often carries the first signs of rebirth. It arrives uninvited, demanding attention, dragging us into corners of ourselves we would rather avoid. But if we stop running, if we turn toward the wound instead of away from it, we begin to see something astonishing. Pain tells the truth. Not the truth that flatters, but the truth that liberates. Emotional pain is not always caused by what's wrong with you. More often, it is your soul's response to a world that forgot how to honor its depth. You live in a culture that celebrates constant motion, shallow relationships, and curated perfection. There is little space for grief, little language for sorrow, and yet the human heart longs to be known, not just in triumph but in tenderness. When that longing goes unmet, it speaks through symptoms, anxiety that never quiets, sadness that lingers without name, restlessness that no accomplishment can satisfy. These are not random malfunctions. They are messages. Messages from the parts of you that have been ignored, denied, repressed. From the child within who learned it was safer to stay silent than to risk not being heard. From the adolescent who was told their emotions were too much, too dramatic, too inconvenient. From the adult who keeps performing because the stillness feels unbearable. Pain is what emerges when the soul refuses to stay silent any longer. And while we can ignore it, drown it in distraction, medicate it into submission, spiritualize it into invisibility, it always returns, not to punish, but to remind. To remind you that something sacred is being forgotten, that you were not made to survive by disconnecting from yourself. That wholeness is not found by becoming invulnerable, but by becoming true. C.S. Lewis once reflected that the heart breaks not to destroy, but to let the light in. And when we listen to our wounds, when we approach them with compassion rather than judgment, we discover they are not signs of personal failure. They are evidence of where love must go. The wound reveals where care is missing, where truth was denied, where healing is needed. But to reach that healing, you must be willing to feel what you've spent a lifetime avoiding. You must be willing to sit with sadness, not fix it, to allow anxiety to speak, not silence it, to notice numbness and ask, what part of me gave up trying to be felt? This work is not easy. It is raw. It is sacred. It is slow. But it is also holy. Because when you stop hiding your wounds, they stop controlling you. When you name your pain, you begin to reclaim your story. The story you were told to suppress. The story that still aches to be heard. Pain does not want to define you. It wants to deliver you. From the lies that say you're too much, too weak, too broken. From the inner critic that was never your voice to begin with. From the impossible standards that keep you hustling for worthiness. It wants to return you to yourself, and in doing so, to God. Not the God of quick fixes and shallow peace, but the God who meets you in the ache. The God who is not afraid of wounds. The wound reveals where care is missing, where truth was denied, where healing is needed. But to reach that healing, you must be willing to feel what you've spent a lifetime avoiding. You must be willing to sit with sadness, not fix it, to allow anxiety to speak, not silence it, to notice numbness and ask, what part of me gave up trying to be felt? This work is not easy. It is raw. It is sacred. It is slow. But it is also holy. Because when you stop hiding your wounds, they stop controlling you. When you name your pain, you begin to reclaim your story. The story you were told to suppress. The story that still aches to be heard. Pain does not want to define you. It wants to deliver you. From the lies that say you're too much, too weak, too broken. From the inner critic that was never your voice to begin with. From the impossible standards that keep you hustling for worthiness. It wants to return you to yourself, and in doing so, to God. Not the God of quick fixes and shallow peace, but the God who meets you in the ache. The God who is not afraid of wounds. Who does not shame your tears. Who does not flee your questions. That's where healing begins. Not in perfection, but in presence. Not in knowing all the answers, but in finally telling the truth. In the next part, we'll explore how these wounds can become sacred ground, not just for healing ourselves, but for learning how to love others with a depth we didn't know was possible. Wounds that are hidden become prisons, but wounds that are honored can become doors. Doors to connection, compassion, and communion, both with others and with the divine. This is the sacred paradox. Your pain, which once isolated you, can become the very thing that draws you closer to others. Why? Because pain dissolves illusions. When you stop pretending you're fine, you create a space where others no longer have to pretend either. Emotional pain, when faced with honesty and tenderness, doesn't just humanize you. It frees others to be human too. We live in a society of masks. Everyone smiles through their sadness, performs through their pain. But underneath the polish, there is quiet suffering. When you choose to stop hiding, you become a mirror, showing others that vulnerability is not weakness, but an invitation. C.S. Lewis understood this in his own grief. When he wrote A Grief Observed, He didn't try to be impressive. He didn't try to protect his image as a Christian thinker. He let his sorrow bleed onto the page. He questioned God. He doubted himself. He confessed his spiritual disorientation. And in doing so, he created a sacred space where countless readers could exhale and say, "Me too." This is the unexpected gift of pain. It deepens your ability to love, not superficially, but soulfully. You become less quick to judge and more ready to understand. You listen differently. You see through the masks people wear, not to expose them, but to embrace them. Your wound teaches you that everyone is carrying something, that behind every outburst, every silence, every addiction or perfectionism or detachment, there is a person longing to be seen, and that person may be you. But the connection doesn't stop with other people. Pain, when faced with faith, also becomes a path to God. Not the God of distant theology, but the God who enters into suffering, the God who became human and wept, the God who bled, the God who was, in the words of Isaiah, a man of sorrows acquainted with grief. In your most wounded places you are not far from God, you are closest, because that's where he meets you, not on the mountaintop of triumph, but in the valley of tears. And yet so many of us have been taught the opposite, that we must fix ourselves before coming to God, that we must be grateful instead of grieving, that emotional pain is a sign of spiritual failure. But the Psalms are full of anguish. Jesus himself cried out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" Scripture is not a collection of sanitized success stories. It is the raw record of a people who bled and believed at the same time. Your pain does not disqualify you. It is part of your becoming. When you allow your wounds to be seen, when you stop hiding them in shame, they begin to shine. Not with perfection, but with presence. And in that presence you find something holy. The courage to show up as you are. The freedom to let others do the same. The strength to say, "I don't have all the answers, but I know what it is to hurt, and I will not leave you in your pain." This is love. Not sentimentality, not spiritual bypassing, but real, grounded, embodied love that touches the places people are most afraid to show. And that kind of love only flows through the heart that has been broken and remained open. In the next section, we'll explore how that openness becomes strength, how the healing of your pain doesn't just restore you, it reshapes you into a source of strength, softness, and sacred presence in the lives of others. Healing doesn't mean going back to who you were before the pain. It means becoming someone new, someone deeper, truer, wiser, someone who has passed through the fire and come out, not untouched, but purified. In a culture that idolizes resilience as toughness, we forget that the strongest people are often the softest, not because they were spared pain, but because they allowed pain to soften them instead of harden them. They learned that true strength is not found in armor, it is found in authenticity. When you allow yourself to heal, you don't just get better, you become more real. The masks fall off. The old narratives lose their grip. The perfectionism that once ruled your life begins to fade. You stop trying to prove your worth, and instead begin to live from it. Because healing is not about becoming invulnerable, it's about becoming whole. Wholeness is not the absence of wounds, it's the integration of them. It's the willingness to say, "Yes, I've suffered, and I carry the marks of that suffering. But those marks no longer define me, they've become part of my sacred story." C.S. Lewis often spoke of how pain was not a barrier to faith, but a gateway, a place where the soul is invited into maturity. "We are not necessarily doubting that God will do the best for us," he wrote. "We are wondering how painful the best will turn out to be." And yet, through that pain, something unshakable is formed. Not because you've solved your life, but because you've stopped running from it. When you begin to heal, you start living differently. You become less reactive, less afraid of discomfort. You stop numbing your feelings and instead learn to hold them with compassion. You begin to listen more, to yourself, to others, and to God. You discover that your value has never depended on how productive you are or how much you achieve. It has always been inherent. Your story, even the painful parts, has value. You stop asking, how can I get rid of this pain? And start asking, what is this pain making possible in me? And slowly, quietly, you begin to see it. The same pain that once felt like it would destroy you is now forming the foundation of something sacred. You no longer view emotions as enemies to be suppressed, but as signals to be honored. You no longer live in shame, but in honesty. You no longer fear your vulnerability, but trust it as your strength. This is the paradox of healing. It makes you softer and stronger at the same time. It doesn't make life easier, but it makes you more present, more grounded, more whole. And when others come to you with their pain, you don't offer cliches or fixes. You offer presence. You offer witness. You offer the quiet strength of someone who has been there and stayed. That is how healing multiplies. It starts in silence, grows in honesty, and blooms into love. Not the kind of love that rescues or repairs, but the kind that remains, the kind that says, I see your pain, and you are not alone. In the final part, we'll explore how this journey through pain doesn't end with personal transformation, but becomes a calling to live as one who sows meaning in a wounded world. There comes a moment in every healing journey when you realize, this wasn't just for me. The pain I endured, the darkness I passed through, the healing I embraced, it all prepared me to become something more than just someone who survived. It prepared me to become someone who serves, someone who carries light, someone who sows meaning into a world that's still in pain. This is the quiet calling of the healed, not to fix others, not to save them, but to walk beside them, to be a living witness that pain does not mean the end of the story, that healing is possible, that brokenness is not the final word. We live in a culture drowning in emotional pain and starving for emotional presence. People are aching not just for solutions, but for someone to see them, to sit with them in the mess, to say, you are not wrong for feeling this way. You are not broken, you are becoming. And that kind of presence can only be offered by those who have done their own work, who have listened to their pain instead of silencing it, who have wrestled with God in the silence and stayed, who have wept and still chosen love. These are the people who change the world, not with loud answers, but with quiet courage, with a presence that doesn't demand transformation, but gently invites it. C.S. Lewis, after his own journey through suffering, did not become less spiritual. He became more grounded, more compassionate, more aware of the mystery of God and the complexity of the human soul. He understood that life with God was not about escaping pain, but finding Him in the middle of it. And that discovery, simple, searing, sacred, is what your story can offer too. Every person you meet is carrying something unseen. Their smiles may be masks, their anger may be grief, their silence may be fear. When you have walked through your own pain with love, you begin to see others differently. You stop labeling, you stop judging, you start listening, not to fix, but to understand. And in that understanding, healing begins. This is what it means to sow meaning, to plant seeds of truth, compassion, and presence in the soil of human experience. Seeds that grow quietly, slowly, but seeds that last. Your pain, when healed, becomes purpose. Not a task, but a way of being. Not a career, but a calling. A calling to live with honesty, to love with gentleness, to be the kind of presence you once needed, not because you have all the answers, but because you're not afraid of the questions anymore. Not because you never feel pain, but because you've learned to hold it without shame. That is power, that is healing, that is the gift your story offers the world. So no, you are not broken. You are being reformed, remembered, restored. You are learning how to live from the center of your own soul, and from that center you will shine, not as someone who has never suffered, but as someone who suffered and stayed, who healed and kept their heart open, who now walks with quiet strength into a world that still aches, carrying seeds of meaning in your hands. Sow them with kindness, sow them with love, sow them with the fierce tenderness of someone who knows what it means to hurt, and still chose to become whole.